Paddington disaster, 70 dead, scores still unaccounted for. The search for answers was signalling to blame. Survivors describe how they escaped and others didn't. And Lady Thatcher catches centre stage again at the Tory conference.
From ITN, the ITV Nightly News with Dermot Monaghan.
Good evening. At least 70 people are now feared killed in yesterday's rail crash in West London, most of them in one burnt-out first-class carriage. Police are also checking on the whereabouts of 100 other people who may have been on the trains involved and are so far unaccounted for. Investigations into the cause of the disaster are centring on one particular signal and on reports that the driver of the Thames train heading out of Paddington had gone through it on red. Tonight, the government promised to get all trains fitted with the best safety system, whatever the cost. ITN's Paul Davis reports from the crash scene.
Tonight, they've been knocking down trackside buildings, clearing a road through to the wrecked trains so a giant crane will be able to lift the broken carriages. Attempts to recover more of the victims have been suspended for the night. It has been a harrowing day and a frustrating day for the emergency teams, and still they must wait to recover the bodies of all the victims. What has become clear is that this tragedy is much, much greater than anyone could possibly have imagined. The police are now warning that as many as 170 people may still be missing.
70 people, we are quite convinced, are on those trains because people said they know they got on those trains. People have rung up and told us that their friends, relatives may possibly have got on those trains, and it's that extra 100 that we're working through. Have they gone home already? Have they already been found? Was this a false report? Whatever it was. So we need to work through that.
At Downing Street this afternoon, the Prime Minister said the country should prepare for the worst.
So the rescue operation is still going on, but I think we have to brace ourselves now for an even higher death toll. And our hearts and our sympathy and our condolences go out to the families of those that have died and the injured.
The broken, burnt-out wreckage of the two commuter trains remains where they collided at the height of yesterday's rush hour. Although the investigation has only just started, the rail companies are convinced it was the slower Thames train that was in the wrong place. Today they confirmed warning signals on the line were working properly and the Great Western Express was cleared to pass through. The only option for investigators is that the driver of the Thames train, qualified just 2 months ago, passed through this red light. Today, the train drivers' union said that signal had been passed on red 8 times in 5 years. They had repeatedly complained to Railtrack that it was badly sighted.
Signal 109 has given great concern to this trade union. Our officers and people on the ground have been raising the particular problems with the sighting of this signal. It has been actually well known about since 1993.
Throughout the day, flowers have been left at the crash site. Some expressed anger, but this bouquet was from the brother of one of the train drivers, both of whom are among the missing presumed dead. This afternoon, 30 hours after the collision, another body was recovered from the devastation, to be followed by 2 more. Like the victims recovered yesterday, they're being taken to local hospitals to await post-mortem operations. 28 bodies have been located so far. The emergency teams fear the remains of many more victims are still inside the gutted first-class carriage of the Great Western service. The site is covered with tarpaulin. Today, police warned that a fire that touched 1,000 degrees centigrade could mean many victims will never be identified. Tonight, the emergency teams say they're preparing for the worst, though it could still be some time before they can complete their grim task. It will be tomorrow before this roadway is completed and a giant crane can reach the trackside to lift the carriages so the pathologists can finally reach the bodies. In the meantime, as many as 170 families are still desperately waiting for news. Paul Davis, ITN, West London.
The fact that so many bodies still have to be recovered, let alone identified, is prolonging the agony for families all along the routes of the two trains. As Howell Jones reports, the Berkshire commuter town of Reading appears to have been particularly hard hit.
Tonight, Reading is a town bearing a heavy burden of many families who lost relatives in the crash, others who still wait for news. Among the cars parked at Reading's rail station are some left there by commuters early yesterday. It's clear tonight that many of their owners will never return. As in other towns, there is a helpline for families who fear the worst. The task ahead, identifying victims, will be a long, difficult procedure.
That procedure is going to take some considerable time. People may have expectations that we will identify in a matter of hours or days. I think that's unrealistic. This could take many weeks.
And over the coming weeks, Dr. Michael Reddy will run a team of counsellors hired by the rail companies. Dr. Reddy says the counsellors must provide an almost physical sense of security for survivors and grieving families.
I think the worst thing is when people re-experience what they've been through. And the worst of that, it's not just like remembering or suddenly it's triggered. It's almost as though you're invaded again by the sounds and the smells and the taste even in the air, as well as all of the horror, as it were, of what's around you. And sometimes that kind of just breaks in on people unexpectedly.
Nearly 40 hours after the crash, dozens of families are still desperate for hard information about relatives. For others in Reading and elsewhere, the grieving has quietly begun. Howell Jones, ITN.
Dozens of passengers who survived the crash and fire are tonight still in London hospitals, 11 of them at St Mary's in Paddington. Amongst the visitors there today were the Prime Minister and later the Prince of Wales. Juliet Bremner reports.
At hospitals tonight, confirmation of the rising death toll only underlined how fortunate survivors had been. After emergency surgery to remove his spleen, Brendan Bentley was beginning to realise how close he'd come to death. As all around him, people perished in the inferno.
I could see the flames, and there was some people trapped underneath the seats, so we had to try and get over them and tried to give them a hand, but we couldn't. So then it was first priority just to get off the carriage.
It was thanks to the heroic efforts of medical staff that so many pulled through, and Prince Charles visited them at St Mary's Hospital to thank them personally. Accounts of the horror and chaos bringing home the true nature of this disaster.
My heart goes out to all those relations and the families of those who've lost their lives.
For those with broken bones, haunting memories of the carnage they crawled away from.
I looked round just to see what had happened and just remember thinking, like, oh my God, what a mess. This is absolutely horrendous.
But the anxious wait here at St Mary's Hospital is far from over. Of the 19 people still detained, 2 are so seriously ill that doctors can't say whether they'll survive. And for those who've been badly burned, the terrible prospect that they'll bear the scars of this tragedy for the rest of their lives. Doctors decided just one man was well enough to leave St Mary's. Steve Jones went home nursing a burnt hand and confused emotions.
There's this balance between feeling very grateful but at the same time feeling guilty, and just knowing that there are people there, knowing that that one carriage, there's nothing you could do.
At Chelsea and Westminster Hospital, Neil Benham was reunited with his wife. It was thoughts of her and their as yet unborn child that kept him going. Juliet Bremner, ITN, St Mary's Hospital, London.
So, as we've reported, another disaster apparently caused by a train going through a red light. And the government pledged tonight of a new safety system to stop it happening again. One such system, called Automatic Train Protection, or ATP, was first recommended after the Clapham disaster back in 1988. Here's Helen Wright.
The new Heathrow Express is one of only a handful of UK routes fitted with the ATP system. But it's commonly used on modern high-speed routes across Sweden, France and Germany. After a trial run of the system on Great Western and Chiltern trains in the early 90s, the government decided not to expand it across the whole UK network because of the huge costs. Industry estimates suggest installing ATP would cost over £1 billion. Until yesterday's crash, it was thought 2 or 3 deaths each year could have been prevented by ATP, though some commentators questioned whether that justified the cost. Others believe you can't put a price on the safety of commuters who make 890 million train journeys a year.
What you're seeing now is profit being put in front of people's lives. It's unacceptable, and you can have all the government inquiries you want and all the crocodile tears. It has now got to end.
ATP steps in to override any driver it thinks is endangering a train. It can slow it down or bring it to a halt. Ministers are looking again at the system and a cheaper alternative, though one has told ITV's Tonight programme money is not the issue.
If it's a difference between 150 million and $1 billion, then money won't be an object in implementing that.
This appalling accident has once again focused attention on train safety systems like the ATP fitted to all Heathrow Express rolling stock. And tonight the government is promising a full inquiry into train protection systems, which could report back before the end of the year. Helen Wright, ITN at Paddington Station.
Well, over now to our senior correspondent, Mark Austin, at the scene of the disaster. Mark, nearly 2 days on and the full scale of this tragedy still to become apparent.
Yes, Dermot, there's a very sombre atmosphere here tonight. The operation to extricate these bodies has been called off, but for the fire crews and the rescue teams who have been here since yesterday morning, they can't have imagined the scale of the tragedy they'd be dealing with. And if you can see from our second camera, it's very quiet here tonight. They're waiting now for these cranes to come in to lift these carriages, and who knows what they'll find underneath. And just as an example of the kind of stresses they're under, I understand tonight that 3 of the rescue team have been sent home, overwhelmed by what they've seen in the last 48 hours, completely stressed out. And stress counsellors are on site here 24 hours a day to help these rescue teams get through this terrible ordeal.
And Mark, how exactly will they go about the search for the rest of the dead?
Well, it's going to be a very difficult and long operation. As we heard from Paul Davis, they're getting these cranes in. It's going to take 15 hours, I understand, to simply erect these cranes at the side of the track. Then this lifting operation starts. And it's going to take 2 or 3 days to get these carriages off the track, stabilize them. Pathologists have got to go in, try, as we've heard, to identify the people in this terrible burnt-out carriage. That could take a long time. It really is an operation that's going to take several days, and it's going to be an ordeal for relatives who wait for news and for the people working here.
Thank you, Mark. Now to other news, and a doctor held hostage at the Withybush Hospital in Haverfordwest in Pembrokeshire for more than 24 hours has been released in the last half an hour. Police say he's physically unharmed, but will be undergoing a checkup. Negotiations are still continuing with the man who took him hostage. What he wants isn't known, though his priest said he was distraught about his mother's recent death. Lady Thatcher tonight used the Conservative Party conference to champion General Pinochet and express outrage at his arrest in Britain a year ago. She said it amounted to judicial kidnap, which would do credit to a police state. Joe Andrews reports from Blackpool.
To the sound of music from the film The Mission, Lady Thatcher made her way through a hall packed with cheering Conservatives and hundreds of the General's political supporters who'd flown in from Chile just for this.
My friends, thank you for that fantastic welcome. It is 9 years since I spoke at a Conservative Party conference. A lot has happened since then, and not much of it for the better.
Lady Thatcher spoke of her deep shame at the General's treatment, outlining details for the first time of the long-range radar help given by the Chileans during the Falklands War. She called the General's arrest judicial kidnap.
This is a government which grants amnesties to unrepentant terrorist murderers, yet overturns an amnesty in Chile and imperils that country's young democracy. My friends, this is a government which discredits and dishonors Britain.
She was given a standing ovation as she left, and she later told ITN she felt she'd done her bit.
And what do you think you achieved with your speech this evening?
I hope an exposition of the true facts as they are. And of course, I hope that this helped General Pinochet a bit.
And then it was off to dinner with supporters of the man she calls Britain's only political prisoner. Joe Andrews, ITN, Blackpool.
And General Pinochet, who's 83, was today excused attendance at the next stage of his battle against extradition to Spain because of his poor health. He had been due to appear before Bow Street magistrates the day after tomorrow. Football now, and the England coach Kevin Keegan was today preparing for the friendly against Belgium, but thinking about getting into the Euro 2000 playoffs courtesy of Sweden. If it doesn't happen, he said England will just have to rebuild. Graham Miller reports.
Kevin Keegan confessed today his heart tells him Sweden will secure England their place in the Euro 2000 playoffs. His head, though, is more realistic. England needs Sweden to beat Poland on Saturday to survive. Any other result and they're out. And Sunday's friendly against Belgium will be little more than a run-around.
If Sweden do us the favour that we want, and I'm sure the Swedish coach wants and the players, then that'll be great. We'll get given a lifeline. If it doesn't work that way, then we'll start to plan for the next World Cup and we'll rebuild. And by rebuild, I don't mean necessarily throw everybody out with over 30. That's not my way.
Alan Shearer has yet to train this week because of an ankle problem, but Keegan expects his captain and the other injury doubts to be fit to play at Sunderland's ground on Sunday. Only David Beckham is definitely ruled out. The Manchester United midfielder is struggling with a hamstring strain and is already back at Old Trafford, undergoing treatment. Graham Miller, ITN Sport.
The headlines again. At least 70 people are now feared dead in the rail disaster in West London yesterday. The government tonight promised to ensure all trains are fitted with new safety systems, whatever the cost. And Lady Thatcher said tonight that the way General Pinochet was arrested in Britain a year ago would do credit to a police state. Tonight's financial figures: the FTSE 100 share index closed up 13 points. In New York, the Dow rose 187 points, and the pound was up 1/4 cent against the dollar. Now a look at how tomorrow's papers are covering the Paddington disaster. And the Times shows a female firefighter wiping away her tears. It focuses on Carriage H, the first-class coach which police fear could contain the remains of many more dead passengers. That picture again in the Telegraph. It reports on pressure on the government and rail companies to introduce automatic train protection, the safety system which could cost £1 billion. The Guardian shows Signal 109, the red light believed to have been passed by the driver of the Thames commuter train. The Express headline speculates on the final death toll. It says rescuers are working knee-deep in ash in the burnt-out carriages. And the Sun spreads its story across the front and back pages. It pictures the firefighter again with its front page turned black in mourning for the dead. And that's all for now. The ITV Evening News is at 6:30 tomorrow, and we're back at 11. From all the team here tonight, good night.
Some rain at times for northern parts of Britain over the next few days as weather fronts move in from the west. You can see on the satellite picture today the clouds already gathering across northern parts of Britain and already some outbreaks of rain there. Further south and east with clear skies, there's a cold night ahead. Already temperatures are falling quite sharply and there will be a touch of frost around, I think, in the southeast tonight. Further north and west you are, we have that weather front coming across Scotland and Northern Ireland now with outbreaks of rain. By the end of the night it'll have cleared southwards into northern England and North Wales with showery bursts of rain there. Clearer conditions to follow with just an isolated shower. The southeast staying dry right through the night, and that's where it's coldest, down to just 2 degrees in places, and certainly a ground frost around. For tomorrow, we'll start the day with the thick clouds still across the southeast of Scotland, edging south and east through the day in towards southeast England, just a shower there. But for the northwest, after a bright start, things clouding over as the next weather system moves in from the Atlantic, so more rain for the north and west through the day. As for temperatures, after that cold start in the southeast, back up to around 16, 14 more typically, I think, and that's about 57. Good night.
Power Gen. Power, whatever the weather.
The Five Nations.